What's going on, Serial Progress Seekers? Marshall here, and I am so excited that you decided to join us for part 2 of this amazing conversation. Now, that means if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I'm talking about episode 93, make sure you go back and check that out. We talked about how you can build a great deal of confidence by setting boundaries with your friends and with your family. And this week, we're actually going to take it another step further. We're going to dive into what it means and what it takes to actually set boundaries with your coworkers and to do the same thing in romantic relationships. Plus, we're actually going to spend some time talking some specific strategies and tactics that you can put into play today to start building your own red carpet confidence. So let's pick up this conversation right now. We're going to start talking about how to set boundaries at work. This is episode 94 of the Serial Progress Seeker podcast. Let's go.
Welcome to the Serial Progress Seeker podcast, where we share blueprints for building an unconventional life. Each week, we conduct expert interviews, talk strategies, and share advice for escaping the 9-to-5 and building a life where you are free to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, all while making an excellent living. Okay, Serial Progress Seekers, let's get started with the show.
I think this one's probably the easiest for me just because of my position. This is where, how real are you guys going to be with this? But work's hard. And the dynamic of work, I think, and setting boundaries at work is hard sometimes because especially if you like your job, you want to keep your job. And, that's incredibly difficult if you don't set boundaries. I want to give a real opening statement here as to this one, and that's something that I respected a long time ago. When Tabitha came to work here, Tabitha was very open about what Tabitha wanted out of work. Like very open. And it was something that, and this is Tabitha to a T. Tabitha will tell you what her expectations of something are. And I think that's good because there was a possibility that I couldn't meet them, but it was up front in front of me. And so it was important. But one of the things that Tabitha says is I don't want to be up at 3 a.m. Because of an emergency. I don't want to be in a job where I can't leave on a vacation when I want to leave on a vacation and I have to take work with me. And there's people on our team that they love being in the thick of it. They love being in it. And I don't think any of us work at 3 a.m. anymore, myself included, but which used to be my jam. But I think the thing that was really good about Tabitha is there was absolutely a place for Tabitha at our team with having different things than the person that had somewhat of her gig before, that other people in the team. There was absolutely a place, but it was so much easier to work with Tabitha right out of the gate because we knew what the expectations were, what she wanted out of a job, not just with us, but what she wanted out of a job. And so props to you. I'm going to shut up. I want to hear kind of some things, and I can get into some of my things later. But in terms of work boundaries, what's difficult for you guys? I think that's, what's difficult, what's easy, what are some things that you've struggled with? And this is where you can totally get public therapy out. No, I'm kidding. But you guys, I think it's important that, with anybody that's out there listening right now, that you have a job where you feel like you're being abused or you feel like you're being manipulated, you feel like you're being put into a position where you're being taken advantage of. This is important to break down what's actually happening. And everybody's in a different position. Everybody needs gigs for different reasons. But I think it's super important that with every employer that you establish this kind of thing, or as an employer that you establish this back and forth. There's things that I've had to really get out that were hard for me because I felt like me getting them out made other people feel like I'm taking advantage of them. And so it's complicated. I think it's complicated for a lot of people listening. Tab, I'll let you start.
Well, I was just going to say, just because I laid all that groundwork out doesn't mean that I still don't struggle with some of those things, because I do enjoy my job. And I still, even when I'm on vacations or I've left the work, I still am checking in because I have a hard time letting go. But establishing those boundaries right off the gate, and not that I saw them as boundaries, because I don't think they are. They think they were just, hey, this is what I want out of life. Not necessarily a boundary, but it helped be able to, I'm glad that you were able to tell me that, because that made me happy. but when setting boundaries, like I am notorious for turning off like my Slack notifications at a certain time. Like I have just recently started doing this boot camp thing. So like I have very set work schedule. I leave at 4:30 and go get my workout in. And there's just certain little things that I do to make sure that I get what I want out of life, because work is this much of my life. It really is not a huge part. I love what I do. I love working with the people that I work with, but it's not my all do all be all. So it's gotta fit in with everything else, and setting certain little boundaries, like turning off Slack and making sure that I leave at a certain time. Now that's not to say that there's not emergencies, and I have worked late at night sometimes. That does happen, but it's not the norm. It's not the expectation. It's the yeah.
Right. What about you, Marshall?
Oh man, how much time you got? Also, which couch do I lay on? Because we're about to dig deep here. But no, for me, it's been less about. No, I can't even say that, to be honest. I have had to really decode something that was beaten into my head and programmed within me since I was probably, I don't know, 3 years old. I am a product of a house where you had to make good grades because you had to go to college, because you had to get a good professional job, because you had to make a good living, and all of that was going to be built into this kind of structure. All of that being said, I don't look upon any of that negatively because it led me here. It's all positive stuff. But and even into my early career of working in the quote unquote corporate world and doing some of that, there were boundaries that were put in place that I didn't set. Which is that's been my biggest thing that I've had to learn, was breaking the chains of those boundaries and looking at this wide open field in front of me and being able to set my own. And it's something that I fight through every single day. And there's an element of, with those set for me boundaries came a certain level of confidence that when that was taken away, some of that confidence got wiped away too. Which has been tough to kind of work through and deal with. But it's what I do love absolutely the most about what we do is the internal challenge that I literally have when I sit down at my desk every single day and I go, literally, I can remember being back in the, quote unquote corporate world and thinking, okay, what am I going to make of this day? It was almost like it was someone else speaking. But now when I sit down at this desk and I have that conversation with myself, it's me talking and it's me looking at what's in front of me and stuff like that. So all that being said, the boundaries thing is something that it's a process every day. It's almost like a moving goalpost. And, I might nail a 50-yarder today, and then I might hit one off the crossbar from 10 feet away tomorrow. So it's just one of those things, but it is a really interesting process to go through. And that's, when we talk about setting boundaries and how they relate to confidence, the work and professional one is the one that I feel like I'm working on the most in my own personal life. So.
Gotcha. No, I love that. I mean, that's a very honest perspective. And I think that we do carry trauma from job to job. And I think that when you come from a place sometimes, and I'm speaking of my jobs, not yours, when you come from a place where boundaries were poor and it was toxic, it's easy to jump into a new gig and think that that's in place there too. And, it's like getting out of a bad romantic relationship. You carry those things with you, and it takes time to deprogram yourself from those things. I'm going to speak from a different perspective, and I'm going to speak in sort of the context of what we do. It has been very hard for me to get out of the way. And what I mean by that is when I started this company, however many years back, I think we're like over a decade in now. But when I started this company years back, I had to be a different person than I am now. I had to be aggressive. I had to be the center of the universe. I had to be the person that the buck stops here, and it still stops with me. Don't get me wrong, but it's more subtle and more nuanced at this point. But when I first started, I had to make decisions. I had to make decisions fast, and sometimes I had to make decisions saying I'm right, and I had no idea if I was actually right. And there's a very aggressive, and it's very hard to have people working with you when that is the person you have to be every day to make sure everybody gets paid. It was a different time then. But the problem is you get into a place to where you understand that if you build a business that way, if you build a business that is completely, focused on you, and I'm getting to the boundaries part, I promise. When you build a business that is focused on you, the business is only ever as good as what you can do and put on your back. And so the thing is when I got to a place where I understood, I've got to have a good team around me. They've all got to do really great things. On one hand, you could micromanage everything. That is the vibe you want to lean into when you build a business like I've built, from the ground up that way. It's like you want to have your hand in everything, but you start to understand that then everything is still on your back. The problem is when you start to let go and you start to really let people do their thing, everybody has to understand that it's now time to challenge you. And so the current, the boundaries that I'm trying to sort of establish that are very hard because they're hard for me to enact and be the kind of person I need to be is I need people around me that challenge my ideas. I need people that do things I disagree with sometimes and fight for those things so that they can put them forward. And the boundaries that I'm trying to establish right now is like, if you do something that I disagree with, I am not going to shut you down. And that's hard when you have to make the final decision. There's got to be a quarterback. There's got to be somebody that says, this is what's going to production. This is what's going out into the world. And it's difficult to build something with a group of people when you've got that. So I say all that to say this: whether you are somebody that is a boss or you are somebody that is working for somebody else, when you find somebody that is looking for that balance, work with them and keep going. I think those are difficult to find. I'm not saying that I'm doing anything special. What I'm saying is I have found difficulty finding the situations where people get paid to misbehave. People get paid to be their more authentic self, not to show up and be professional all the time. And I think that that's the thing. It's like, if you listen to what we're doing, I want you guys to go back and listen to the podcast when I was doing it by myself. It could only go so far. It was only so interesting. I want you to listen to the podcast that we were doing 6 months ago. I want you to listen to the podcast we were doing 3 months ago. Listen to this one. And then I want you to listen further down the road. And I want you to see, the evolution of what this is. And it's because the work boundaries of this have gotten stronger with each individual. And that's what we're going for anyway. But also that I have figured out more of what my boundaries are in this new role. And I think that that's key, is like when you're in work, it's always good to understand what the boundaries are. And that can take years sometimes. But I think it's also when you go into a new gig, you've got to pull a Tabitha. You've got to say, this is what I expect out of a gig. I will be there and I will work my tail off for you, but this is what I expect. These are the lines, and you can't cross these lines. If you cross these lines, I'm gone. And that was never said that way, but that's the expectation that was in my head. And that's the expectation with everybody that I have. There are certain lines that I don't want to cross with people, not because it's a threat. It's because that is what they need to operate at the highest level. And I think from an employee standpoint, that's what I always want too. I want to know, how can I be as much of me as possible and get the job done the best way? And if I've given those things, and I'm usually given those things that I need because I've set those boundaries, and I'm speaking a lot with client work. When we do work for other clients, it's so important that I tell a client, because I work for them, but it's so important I tell a client, this is what we will accept, this is what we will not accept. That's why contracts are so incredibly important. It's on paper. This is what this looks like. And it's a pain in the ass to get a contract signed. Not just for us, not just for them. I mean, it's a pain for everybody out there. But the idea is, when you set those expectations that everybody knows what's on the table and you have those boundaries in place, nobody comes into the relationship thinking something differently than what it actually is. And from a work standpoint, I think that's what we're always striving for, is we're trying to find that balance of how we can all be more of ourselves, get what we actually need out of the job, from both a financial perspective, but also from this is just what makes me happy. And, from my perspective, being the quote unquote boss. I don't feel like I'm the boss. I get bossed around, I think, more than anybody. But being the boss, I think what I'm always looking for is how can I get my people to be more, explicit with their boundaries with me and really give it to me so that I understand what they actually need. It's so frustrating. I got a couple of people that we work with right now. I just don't know what motivates them. It's none of our core team, but I don't know what motivates them. I don't know how to get them to do more. I don't know how to put more money in their pocket because they haven't told me what they want. And I think that's the most frustrating thing as a boss. If you're in that position, empower your people to be very upfront with you, empower them to tell you those things. It will be uncomfortable for you. Suck it up, buttercup. I mean, it's okay. If you understand those things, you can be more effective. Now, I will say this too. Sometimes when people are setting boundaries and you encourage that, you have to let them go. But that's okay. Make sure that they land somewhere that they can get more of what they want, and everybody wins overall. So work, I think, is difficult for us. It's probably the most difficult thing for us to talk on the podcast because of the relationship that I'm sure you all listening can imagine that we actually have. We're all friends, but we do work, and I do sit in a different position than you guys, and I try to erase that as much as possible, but it doesn't go away, and I understand that. It's always there. And, I always in the back of my mind, Marshall, you're talking about things that are in the back of your mind. I'm always in the back of my mind being like, are they telling me it's good because it's actually good? Or are they telling me that it's good because they think that's what I want to hear? And I think you guys are pretty good at that at this point, but that's scary. That's scary that because somebody works for you that they're going to tell you what you want to hear because you can't grow with that. And, we're going over, our normal time, but I think it's important we get to this last one. And that is romantic relationships. This is sort of the bonus. I think the first three kind of grab this, but romantic relationships, I think, are, this determines so much of your happiness. This will affect how all the other three actually work in a very, very big way. The three of us all have very different situations when it comes to our significant others. And I'll start off here. I didn't realize this when I got married when I was 27. I'd been dating my wife for years before that. So we grew up together, and I can very much say we didn't have the kind of boundaries that we have now. We've really grown together with those boundaries, but there were things coming out of those relationships that I had before her as well that caused us to come into our relationship with some very healthy boundaries that I don't know what would have happened if we had not come into this relationship with those things. But one of the things that's super important for me, and this is going to be so weird, and I'm just giving out all the stuff. For a long time, we've not slept in the same bed. We started off sleeping in the same bed. But all my friends know this, but we don't sleep in the same bed. And it's really interesting. Somebody's listening right now being like, oh, well, that relationship's on the way out. I get it. If that's not your thing, I totally understand this. But for us, it's a very important thing that works for us. It started off with me, just occasionally I would work too late and I didn't want to disturb her. So I would sleep in a different bedroom. That's how it started out. And then we realized how much better sleep we were actually getting because of those things. Now we're on trips. We sleep in the same bed. We sleep in the same room, and that's not a problem. We really appreciate it when we do. But one of the things that was a boundary for us that makes our relationship work. This actually makes our relationship 10 times healthier. Is both of us, from the perspective of sleep time to this perspective of our hobbies, both of us have very separate things that we do on our own, and very together things that we do together. I still feel like to this day that my wife and I are dating. And the reason I think I feel that way, and she's my best friend, but the reason I think I feel that way is because even though we're in the same house, we have a child, we come together, we hang out, we do all these things, we very much feel like we have our own things that we can focus on. So both her and I are people that need to recharge by doing tasks by ourselves. And so rather than conforming to what everybody says you're supposed to do, some things that we locked in on, a while back was this works very well for us. And this, when we're buying a new house at some point, when we're moving, when we're going on trips, when we're staying in awkward places, we dictate how those things go based on what we know are our boundaries with each other. And because of those things, we have better trips. Every so often we'll run into something where that doesn't happen, it doesn't work, and we can't plan, or something changes, and we get into a position to where we're very stressed and we're at odds with each other. And obviously we always get through those things, but very early on we established, this is what I need. And that has evolved, of course, but this is what I need. And the more that I understood what she needed, and I think the more that she understood what I needed, the more communication back and forth to get those needs across to each other. It didn't break us apart. It didn't hurt anybody's feelings. It made us that much stronger. And so the boundaries that we have had with each other over the years, and really conveying those, and still new situations come up. We're like, oh wow, how did we handle that? Okay, like those things are incredibly important for us, and I think that comes because we've invested a lot of time into each other. But even from a new relationship, I think it's super important that you know what, I need an hour by myself. I'm not going to be good with somebody that's on top of me all the time, that just needs to be up against me and touching me all the time. And if you have those things and you understand those things about yourself and you really get that, you can find a partner that is much easier to be compatible with. But if you don't understand those things about yourself and you've not really thought about it, it can be very, very easy to put yourself in a situation to where you have to react in a way that is not you. Tabitha has a huge smile on her face for those of you listening. So I'm going to let Tabitha jump in here.
So confession time. So yeah. I have, and you know this, I've probably secretly judged the two of you. I'm like, how do they not sleep in the same bed together? Like, I don't get it. I just don't get it. My husband broke his foot 4 weeks ago and he's been in a boot and he's been sleeping on the couch because it's like where he came positioned. I've been by myself in my bed and I'm like, they may know something. They may got something going on here. So I literally thought about the two of you and I was like, you know what? They're smarter than I give them credit for.
I am fully aware of that. That is for a lot of people would think that's a warning sign, but it just worked. And it's not something that we were like one day snap. It was just, I slept in there the other night. And then there was 2 nights. And then, and I was like, I just sleep tonight. Slept great. And it's like, you slept great, huh? Interesting.
Me too, yeah.
Yeah. And so you start figuring those things out. And it's like I said, one of the things is like, it's like we're dating, even though we live in the same house, because we need our alone time. When we come together, we have so much to talk about. And so the quality of the hours that we spend together actually go through the roof because we're not forcing having to be in the same room just because we're both at home. And yeah, I think that, I'm not saying that what we do is right. Please, nobody listen to that and think, well, this is the way to do things. I just know with both of our personalities, I think that was what I was initially attracted to, is like, I understand how this person's brain works because this is how my brain works too. Even there's a lot of differences there. So Marshall, thoughts? I mean, like relationships,
you worked really hard to find that person that was like that. I mean, that's I think that's what makes your relationship beautiful. And I think that's and same for me, just in different ways. For me, I was a lot older. I was 36 years old when I got married. So, I was a lot more set in my ways. I already kind of had a lot of my own personal routines, and listen, whoever comes along better get on board type thing.
Right.
And same for my wife. She was older too. And we were both very kind of, we're just fine by ourselves. And if we can make our lives work together, then that'd be great. One thing that we had that's a little different for everybody else is we once again had that boundary of distance. So we had, 3 years where we were 2 hours apart, and 2 hours, everybody's like, okay, well, that's a pretty easy trip. Well, it wasn't. I was working a lot of hours, and so was she. And we spent a lot of time going back and forth and spending weekends with each other and cramming as much as you could possibly cram into a weekend every time we got together. But I'll tell you, at the very beginning of it, the reason we are as strong as we are today is because of those hours we spent apart, because we really, really had to talk and really, really had to get to know each other and learn some of these things about each other and learn some of those boundaries that we didn't even realize about ourselves and about, our potential partner. And, building on confidence, that's exactly what happened. And you become more confident in your relationship. And now it's to the point, and we're still, here we are 4 years down the road, and we're still quote unquote, honeymoon phase type deal. I'm ecstatic when she walks through the door at the end of the night because like we get to share our days together, and then we spend, the majority of our time together. We sleep in the same bed. But it's because that's what works for us. And it's a total give and take, and it's a positive relationship. But I very much, Tabitha, she's very much like you in the fact that I've always known where I stood with my wife, from the very first night that we met. I never had to guess what she was thinking, what she was feeling, because and to me, that was the most refreshing thing I could have ever come across, because, it took all the guesswork out, and I got to be me, she got to be her, and then we got to figure out along the way, oh, these things go together. So it's just a really, really good thing. And like I said, when it comes to boundaries, yeah, I've got my times, just like when Ben said, I've got my times. I'm like, listen, I need to go in another room for a little while. I just need some alone time. It's not even about being away from you. It's just about being by myself. That's kind of my deal. Like I don't, it's not about trying to get away from you specifically. I just want to be alone. And it's just something you realize about yourself. The older you get, that's a boundary. That's something you've set. And I had, 36 years of practice being alone. And now in the last 4 years, I got to figure out, okay, well, I'm not alone all the time. So I got to figure out how to steal those moments and things like that. And that's something she's perfectly okay with. And she does the same thing. So, it's just interesting how those things kind of all interact, but, still strong relationships because of it.
Well, and I think that's a big part of it is like even at this point, it's understanding that, we've been together as long as we've been together. We still are looking to learn more. And I think that, and please, nobody think that I think that I've got it all figured out, but I think that like something that I'm always after, what is the serial progress seeker thing in me? And it is, I'm always trying to get better at something. And in this relationship stuff, it's set more boundaries. That is what you're seeking. And what I mean by that is with communication, you understand your partner's boundaries, you understand your boundaries, and you can help them reinforce those boundaries. And I think that's what it's about. When you understand what they're about and you can help them really, to be there. A boundary that I'm trying to help my wife enforce right now. Like this is really something that, is important to me, is my wife started painting a few months back, and she's got a talent, but I think she understands and I understand that what she's doing right now is not anywhere close to what it could be. And, she has a very tough time with saying, I'm going to paint. For her right now, painting is sort of if I have time, and if I had time in her day. And I told her, I was like, do you want to get to the end of your life and not have really explored this thing that you actually enjoy doing? And I said, listen, I am a problem right now for you. I see this. I come downstairs sometimes because I've been maybe recording a podcast and I get done and I step out because, for those of you that don't know, studio's at my house, so we really got to have some boundaries here because nothing is anywhere else, right? But the idea here is I'll step downstairs and I'll say, hey, how you doing? Because I'll just go downstairs and I'm like, I know she's down here somewhere, but I don't know where she is. So I'll say, hey, what's going on? Where are you at? And if she's in the room painting, I feel guilty. The reason I feel guilty is because I know that kind of activity requires you to be in a state. You to be in a state of flow. And once you get there, if you get pulled out, it's hard to get back in because it was hard to get there in the first place. And so a boundary that I'm trying to like have her establish is like, yes, I'd like this for me because I feel guilty when I pull you out of it. But I would love if every day or 3 times a week, you had something on the calendar where I knew without a doubt that you were in this room painting where I could actively avoid you. And it's not that I don't want to talk to you. She's like, I'm going to be there the second that the clock expires. But like, I want you to have something that is yours, that nobody's going to interrupt you. You can turn the phone off and nobody thinks you're dead. Like, and that's the thing. I want her to have that thing that she's trying to get good at. But I know for a fact it's extremely hard to get good at those things if you don't have time that's set aside to do them. Not because you won't find some time through the week, but because people will interrupt you. And, this is our whole work from home shtick. I think everybody can identify with this. It was extremely hard for our partners to identify with what we did at home. Probably not you guys, but like I interact with a lot of online marketers. I know your spouses and I know who they are. And I know that they kind of get what we do and they have for a long time. But I think for a lot of people that are working from home, people think that we can go do laundry or walk the dog and do a bunch of house chores because we are at home. And the problem is when you're working, that's the benefit of an office. You get to stay in flow, because you go to a location to do this thing. But when you're at home, it can be very difficult, especially when you first start out. Now, at this point, I have this whole room that is dedicated to this. When I'm in this room, I'm in work mode. Nobody bothers me. Now, we've established this over years, obviously, but I do have a space. When you're starting out, you may be in a corner, like you may be in a corner because it's like it's a new thing that you're doing. But I think it's incredibly important for anybody listening to this in your personal relationships. If you're doing something at home, even if it's not your main gig, maybe you go to work and then you come home and do it. It's to establish that when I'm here, I need to be here for this hour. And I think one of the most important things, as folks that work from home is a boundary with our spouses that when I'm working, I can't manage all the things that I get to manage when I'm outside of work hours. And that's why I think it's so important. Like when Tabitha says, I'm gone right here, guys. I know that Tabitha's gone. I don't expect Tabitha to be back. No, if it's something blew up, I can definitely call Tabitha, but like I actively don't want to. I want Tabitha to be away from work as much as possible so that when Tabitha is at work, the work is through the roof. And that's what I think all of us have gotten to understand as we get back into this. And I'm not going to get back into work stuff, but we all understand that the boundaries that we establish here, and this is why we're trying to get to our 4-day work week, right? We're trying to get out of 5 days, even though we don't work all hours through the day like most people. But we're trying to get to that 4-day work week because we know that the more that we get to recharge, the better we are with the time we're here. And we don't get paid for hours. None of us do.
I think one of the biggest things that I've come across as we've been talking is and this is something that I'll go ahead and we're doing a lot of bearing of souls today, so I'll go ahead and throw it out there. But the idea of comparison to others, comparing yourself to others, is something that I think that a lot of people struggle with on a basic level, but also a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of business owners, they're constantly seeing other people online. They're seeing other people in their social media feeds. They're seeing their next door neighbor pizza joint that's kicking ass, but my pizza joint's getting its ass kicked, type thing. And you constantly can find yourself in a state of comparison. And I think that something that would be really beneficial for everyone listening, and I'm writing down notes as we answer these questions, but how do I enhance my own self-confidence to the point where I stop doing that, where I kind of put that to the side, where I can just focus on what I'm doing and not really just compare myself to others, which is a trap that we can all fall into all the time.
Well, for me,
yeah, good luck.
I am confident because of the mistakes that I made that I survived. That is where a lot of my self-confidence comes from. It's not that I learned a lot of things from people to avoid mistakes. And I'm super glad that I did that, but there are still mistakes that I had to make. And I look back on those mistakes and I think I'm glad that I earned those when I did, so that I can get to where I want to go. I think that the huge mistake that people make in their lives all the time when they're trying to be more confident, when they're trying to reach a goal, is they compare themselves to somebody that is 5 years down the road, and they try to do what that person 5 years down the road is doing. Now, you guys see this all the time. You see people that are mimicking, and we see it with social media a lot. We see people that are mimicking the social media stuff of people. And I think that's good. I think it's good. Like we run a whole business that helps people to mimic what people are doing on social media, and, follow what's working. That's good. You should follow what's working. But when you're not getting the same kind of success as that person right away, I think you got to understand that they have stepped on landmines that you've not even come close to seeing yet. And you got to go through it. And so when you look up and you're comparing yourself to somebody, I think sometimes you have to realize that they probably have a lot more arrows in their back than you do. And you can actually look at that person and understand, I'm not going to get to where they are as quickly as I'd like. Maybe I think I should be there right now, but there's maybe some things that I still have to do that are going to get me there, because, and here's where the boundary comes in, I don't want exactly that person's life. If you wanted exactly that person's life, you may think that you do, but sometimes underneath, what's buried underneath that success that they have, there's some things that they had to do. There's some things that were done to them that you would never want to put yourself through. And the boundary is really saying, and this is where this really rubber meets the road here. The boundary here is I've got to say, I'm not where they are yet, even if I think I should be. But when I get there, I'm going to get there because I did it the way that I wanted to do it. I mean, the amount of money, you guys, that I've left on the table over the years by not jumping on the latest trend, not doing what somebody else was doing, even though it was easy money. I mean, it's ridiculous where we could be as a business, where I would be financially compared to where I'm doing fine, but where I could be versus where we are now. But the thing is I wake up every single day now and I love what we do. And I love what we do because we're doing it the right way. And, I get to come to work and actually enjoy everybody that I work with now. I had to step on some landmines to do that. I get to have the life that I want. And this is the thing. Too many times it's about how much money they're making. It's about the exposure that they've got. But do you dig what you're doing? And I know that's, if you're like just starting out and you're like, I'm just struggling, Ben, this sounds super hoofy poofy and all that. But it really is what you're actually going for is happiness. And happiness comes when you are doing it the right way. And there are ways to skip the line. But I know far too many people that when they skipped the line, they ended up divorced. They ended up their kids not talking to them, and they wanted those relationships. Not that it was a bad relationship they need to remove themselves from. They ended up doing things to their bodies that they could never get back. They ended up in a very bad place because they skipped the line. They didn't step on the safe landmines, and so they stepped on the really big ones that blew them up. And I think that's the key. When you start looking around at people that you think, oh, I should have that, the boundary that you got to set internally is like, no, part of this life is making sure that I got there the way that I saw as appropriate, not skipping things in a way that some other people did that are going to put me in a bad spot. Also, you got to understand there are people that did it the right way, that did it their way, and they're just 10 years down the road from you. I mean, that's just, you're going to have to put in the time. And I think that's the thing is I always go back to what did you put your 10,000 hours into? And at this point, I'm very aware of what I put my 10,000 hours into. And I'm so happy that I actually did it rather than trying to skip the line. And so I don't know if that answers the question fully, but that's my response. Tab, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think part of my stuff with setting boundaries is knowing my internal motivator. And I don't know if anybody's ever done the Enneagram test. It's a test that you do. It's a personality test. I've done one, and I've learned that I'm an Enneagram 9, which was nail on the head. But my big motivator in life is just internal peace. So a lot of things, a lot of decisions that I make and boundaries that I put in place have to do with, is that going to bring me internal peace? And if it's not, then it's got to go. I can't. If not, I'm going to be miserable. So like you were talking about businesses and things like that. My husband is dying to open a restaurant, and I am fighting him tooth and nail because I'm like, no, that means I'm working nights and weekends, which is going to take away from my internal peace. And no, that's like big boundary for me. I'm like, no, we are not doing that. So I think just understanding who you are, what your motivators are, what at the end of the day, what's the one thing that really actually does matter to you? And for me, it was internal peace. Still is, like I said, nail on the head on that one. That helped me decide what boundaries I need to put up and where.
Yeah. No. And yeah, what is your core motivator, right? Mm-hmm. So no, I dig it.
Something I think is interesting to ask you guys. I'm going to put you on the spot real quick because as we all keep talking about these two, I almost feel that they're separate but connected type thing. I'm feeling a chicken or the egg situation here. So what comes first? Is it setting the boundaries and then the confidence comes? Or do you have to build the confidence to be able to set your boundaries to be able to live the way you want to? Or, I mean, is it every situation's different? I'd love to know what you guys think about that because I can kind of see it both ways.
I think it's ever changing depending on the situation and how you respond to things too.
I think it starts with one boundary being set. I really do. I think boundaries first.
Now
what I mean by that is this: the more boundaries you set and you live through. Because sometimes when you set a boundary, it's hard. The consequences are hard. You have to say goodbye to people. You have to change the way that you live. But when you set a boundary that was difficult for you to set because, it gets you out of a toxic place, that can be difficult to learn a little bit. It's just like, when you're addicted to something, you have to detox from it. The first little bit sucks. I mean, we got several people on the staff that don't do caffeine anymore. That's not me, by the way. But several on the staff that, and Tabitha, you can speak to this. It's when you're detoxing from something like that, it's incredibly difficult the first little bit. It sucks, but then you get into a much better place. The idea here is when you set a boundary, you are starting to detox from a toxic situation. And that is hard. But when you get on the other side of it, there's a level of confidence that comes with that you survived. And with that level of confidence, you start feeling much more in love with the fact that when you set a boundary, that there is another side to it. There is a good side to it. And so it's about sort of enabling these pathways in your brain that learn that setting boundaries actually gets you somewhere. And I remember just a very difficult portion of my life where I would go out sometimes because I needed the decompression because I do work from home all the time. So I would go out sometimes and I'd have all these expectations of what should happen in a night, and those things wouldn't happen. I would come home and I kind of got into this place of, I need to be very outcome independent about my nights. That was not an easy thing. I talk about that and people think, oh, it's just like that. He got the thought. It was, a few weeks. No, that was like 6 months to a year where I had to constantly be working on, I don't need to expect things from people in this environment because they're not going to, it's not their job to deliver. And so there was a boundary set. It took time. But when I got on the other side of that, it was like, wow, my view of how I entertain myself and how I get things from people out, friends and things that I see out is completely different. And so it gave me a lot of confidence to start setting other boundaries in my life. And when those things worked, I got more confidence. And so I think it starts with one. It starts with one thing in your life that you're like, I have to change this. I have to change this. This is making me sick. This is making me less than what I was put on this planet to be. And there's lots of other things I could change, but I gotta fix this one. And understanding that you're going to go through a period of withdrawal. You're going to go through a period of just like feeling sicker than you did before because you feel like your world's crashing down because that was probably something very foundational that you don't need, but it was there. But once you get through it, you have a level of confidence because you survived it that, everything starts to open up and you start to seeing this as a way to move forward. And it's a tool set that you have to build. And so for me, it's doing one big thing that's probably pretty hard, and then you get in the habit of setting boundaries. And like I said, the reason I talk about boundaries so much that maybe people are like, well, I don't even know that I do this. Every one of you here do it. You just don't call it that. But when you consciously start thinking about what you're doing, it becomes much easier to see all the places that you haven't done it and to see the places that you should and to do it. And it just makes you a much more complete person that can have even better relationships with anybody that's in your life, but people that are coming in new to your life. There are friends that I couldn't make 6 years ago because of who I was, that I could make now because of who I am. And I think that that's an empowering statement there. It's like the quality of my friendships has gone way up, even with the people that I've been friends with for 20 plus years. The quality of what I experience with those people is so much higher because of what I will not allow in my life. So that's my thought on it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I keep finding myself thinking about this too, and we've all touched on them a little bit on whether it's got deals with our friends or our family or our work family or our relationships, romantic relationships. We are all triggered to set boundaries, right? And I wonder if we could identify and benchmark things that are happening in our day-to-day lives that trigger us to set those boundaries. So someone who's listening to this might go, man, that's something that happens to me all the time. And I never even realized that is a need for me to set a boundary. Ben, you've already touched on a couple of them, but can you expand on a couple of those any more as to how someone that's listening to this can go, you know what? I'm dealing with someone who pushes this button for me, and I realize and I recognize the need to set a boundary. I never realized that I needed to put that word to it, but here I am. what is that trigger that I can look for, that I can go, you know what, I got to set this up so I can be more confident, and I can, kind of carry through my life in a more confident manner.
To me, it's disrespect. Now, listen, I focus on this, so I think I see it a lot clearer now than I would have 5-6 years ago. But anytime I see disrespect, it's a problem. Now, a lot of people see this as, oh, that's just how they talk. That's, that's how they like you, because they're picking on you. Okay, is it? Is it really? And I look for those things. I'm like, there are plenty of people in my life that we pick on each other, and it is love. It is love. It is attention that we, but then there are people that do it in a very, very toxic way. And so disrespect. Now, sometimes that disrespect is from somebody that's been in my life a long time, and maybe it's time for them to go, even though something about them changed, or maybe I changed that they can't deal with it anymore and it doesn't work anymore. The chemistry doesn't come together. But more often than not, it is an acquaintance of an acquaintance, and that person works with the person that I like. They don't work with me. And I just have to, what are they doing that puts me in a position to be a person that I'm not? The most recent example of this is just like I said, I was just put into a position where I was like, I'm going to hit this dude. I'm going to hit this dude. I don't ever get there, you guys. I never get to a place of violence. And a couple of weeks back, I get to a place where I'm going to hit this guy in the face. And when I get there, when that hits me, I know that I am in a bad spot, because that's not who I am, And so one of the main things for me is, if I ever get to a place where I am thinking about hitting somebody in the face, it's time to set a boundary. Now, that's a huge red flag, right? Most of the time, these red flags are more subtle. The other is when I'm talking to somebody and they say something where it's negging. Okay, it's negging. For those of you that have ever read or dabbled in the pickup community, I had an author that I love that was heavy into the pickup community, and so I read one of his books that was on that. But he wrote. I started reading him because he wrote books about musicians, and so I was kind of into his stuff that he was doing there. And then he wrote a book about pickup, and I was like, "What is this?" And I got into it, and I was like, "Oh, this is a whole thing." But negging is, it's an act where someone is going to say something that is sort of negative towards you, but in a playful way. And the idea is for it to be something that is odd, that a normal, safe human being would not say to you, so that it gets your attention. Now, there's a level of this that is very, very toxic. And now, maybe 10 years ago, I would have tolerated some of this stuff. But at this point, it's just like, most of the time, people that I have really solid relationships with, by the way, I'm not knocking how anybody interacts with anybody else. That works for some people. That can be a somewhat healthy thing, I think, for some people. But for me, at this point in my life, none of that works. And if I see somebody actively doing that to me or one of my friends in a way that I think is really, really negative, that immediately hits it. And so for me, right away, if I'm talking to somebody, even I've been talking to them a couple minutes, and they resort to something that is just across the line, it's one of those things where it's like, I am taken aback, where it's like, I can't believe that came out of your mouth. And then this is the real answer to your question, though. I have to really quickly say, do they really mean that? What do they want from me by saying that? Or what do they want from the person that I'm with by saying that to them? And there's two paths here. The first path is very innocent. It's very innocent, and it's okay. The second path is, there's something much more devious going on here. Either that person isn't comfortable with themselves, and so they're tearing down the other person, or that person is trying to take advantage of me or somebody that I'm with. And when I see that, and this is, you got to be looking for it. You really have to pay attention to it. When I see that, it's time to end the conversation. I mean, I've literally walked away from somebody that I was in the middle of a conversation with, and that was it. I never talked to them again. Literally, that was it. And I see them out again, but we're done. But once again, sometimes somebody's just, they're having fun, and they have a very positive, it was just a weird thing that came out of their mouth. I've made mistakes when talking. I've said things that I'm like, I went to bed later, I was like, wow, I hope they didn't take that the wrong way. And they did, but I think that's the key, is I think it's about being conscious and really thinking when you're in an interaction with somebody else, what are their intentions? And when you start looking for it even just a little bit, it starts becoming very apparent what their intentions are. And that's when you can put up some really good boundaries. And when you get in the habit of looking for it, you don't have to look for it anymore. And that's the thing. I think with Tabitha's so in the habit of like looking for these things in a way that she doesn't even perceive sometimes, that she doesn't even think about a lot of this. It's just something that's sort of built in. And that's probably your upbringing, right? Like something about your upbringing caused you to be very good at set these things. I don't think most of us are really good at that. And it's something we have to develop. So, if you're one of those people like I was that was poor at it, I think if you just go into some of these situations really thinking about, hey, I'm having fun with this person. Hey, I'm making conversation. I'm meeting new people, but really thinking about what are people's intentions when you're talking to them. It will start to get you there. And that's not to say that you have to blow up or do anything crazy, but if you just start paying attention to it, it really makes a difference.
I'll tell you, what an interesting conversation. I feel like we could just keep going and going. It's very obvious. It's very evident that, confidence and the ability to set boundaries that build that confidence is, it's at the very core of everything that we all do every single day, whether it's personally or professionally. We're doing it. And I hope that people listening to this kind of pull that from this discussion because, laying that foundation for ourselves has just allowed us to continue to grow and build. And that's what we're all trying to do every single day. That's literally the point of being a serial progress seeker, so we can continue to grow. And I think it's, I love having conversations like this because it's relatable on a level. We're not freaking mental health professionals or anything like that, but we've lived and we've breathed this and learned lessons along the way, and we just want to share this with as many people as possible, what we've been able to take. And I think just speaks to the core of everything that we do. Great discussion, guys. Anything you want to add before we jump out of here?
I got one more. I think that just to sum it all
nice.
up, it's how do you really get started with this? It is a habit. Understanding setting boundaries is a habit, and it becomes easier when you get some wins under your belt. When you set that first boundary and you get through it, it becomes easier. And then you become somebody that actually has a really solid set of boundaries around you. And then life gets a lot easier. It really, really does, no matter what you're doing in life. So my challenge to anybody that's listening is if you're in a place right now where you feel like you're getting beat up, if whether it be a family relationship, a friend relationship, or a work relationship, or even a romantic relationship, take a hard look at, even an easy boundary that you can set at the start that is, really putting you in a bad place. But it's something that would be easy for a normal human being to grant you. And you learn a lot about people and who they actually are and what they want from you when you start setting those little boundaries. And so start with something small. Start building the habit. It doesn't have to be overnight, but I guarantee you, if you start with just one thing and you set it, you're going to lose some people out of your life. You got to be okay with that. You got to be okay getting out of those toxic situations, but you're going to start gaining the right people. And 6 months, 12 months into something like this, you're going to wake up one day and realize you like yourself a lot more. And it's because, number one, the people you're surrounding yourself with become higher quality. It's because the people you're surrounding yourself with fit you better. But overall, it's because you respect yourself more. And you start stacking those three things together and your confidence goes through the roof. And then it's amazing how the world opens up to try to help you to get to where you want to go when your confidence opens up that way. So that's what I'll leave you with. And like I said, everybody listening here, I think every one of us just wants the people listening to this to be happier and to be more successful. And we talk about business a lot. We talk about, marketing a lot. But I think at the core of everything we do is this conversation. If it's weird, I'm looking at the clock right now and I can't believe we've talked this long on this topic. But I think this is probably one of the most important podcasts we've done to date. And I hope that, number one, I hope you made it through it. But number two, I hope that this is something that you can go out and you can take some of our personal stories, maybe see it in your own life, and you can take some of this advice, go implement it. And I would love to hear from you down the road. What happened when you did this? It's been huge for us. I know it can be huge for you. let us know. We want to hear back from you.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode of the Serial Progress Seeker podcast. If you want to listen to more episodes, learn more about our mission, or send us questions or feedback about the show, go to serialprogressseeker.com. You can help the mission by subscribing, reviewing, rating,